And I'm working with this secretary on some stuff. And he's she's like, well, let me see if service and he wants to do it. And he goes, marriage license. I'm married to her. I was married to her. His wife was just changed. We're like, you can't do that, brother. Some kind of law in say somewhere. You can't. We're like, yeah, if the married brother do that, first of all, that's illegal. Some friends.
Hey there, bro. I'm doing alright. I've been by to see you a couple of times, and you're always busy or gone.
Snowbirds.
I'm standing in front of the camera, we're live, so I don't really want him to see you.
Okay. Anyway, I just want real quick.
Of course I will. Of course I will.
Well, I mean, you know, in the end, I mean, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Oh, and I love the ducks.
They're cool, yeah. It's a really cool video. I mean, I like it. I mean, it is a lot of people that they're aware of it. People that just love to look at the way degrees from the
And I figured you were,
there's
let me, I'll look and see if I remember the years is up. And if it's you, I will, and I'll let
oh my gosh.
I Well, there is a special, yes, there's a special law. But the zoning board does. Did you see my email? You've been on board for a long time. Yeah, I'll be back. All right, see you later. How are you?
Doing good.
How are you? Hi there. Glad you guys enjoyed it. I saw you at Tammy's. It was good. So, good to see you. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Coming. Let's get it. Thank you for coming. The mayor. Very happy to have you. This is very important. That's your son. He is.
Baby's doing good.
I mean, I
He's up and down.
Hey, that's my style, brother.
All right, sir. Good to see you. Yes, sir. Can't ask him. Right. Now look at it. There you go. Interesting. Exactly. That just needs to be made aware in the beginning.
Oh my goodness. How are you doing, dude?
He's got a bad left ear, a bad right ear. His life. I'm Linda Bowling. I'm everything on that shit. Yeah, I could see it down. That's why he didn't take it up. Oh well, very No, we're from Mondo. We also car wash. That big red car, we're leaving.
I totally can move this back a little bit. I like when they
I just want to go next to you. You want me to go open it? Yeah, that's over.
Y'all are being videoed. Y'all are YouTube sensations right now. Everybody's going out.
Maybe I just modeled after somebody that's, you know, great gal. If anybody says hilarious. And I hate
We'll be recording it.
Everybody's somebody's
We're not sure
My mom and dad come out. Yeah, I know. How are you?
Very important. This meeting is very, very important. And I will start the council meeting in just a second, but I'd just like to let you know that we have index cards if you're interested in writing down comments or questions. And we ask that we have no comments or questions during the presentation because we want you to be really informed. It will also be streamed. Our city secretary is streaming this for you, so if you don't understand Mr. Binford's talk, because it's really, some of those words, what is that? Never mind, I'm talking myself. But we're gonna have it streamed so you can go back and look at the live stream and maybe tweak your questions or come up with other questions. But I thank you all so much, because you all know that we need good development, we need a benchmark, we need a starting point. That's why we're having this for you. This is for the citizens to listen. And Mr. Binford has done an exceptional job getting this together for us. It helps the developers a little bit, I guess, but we're interested in Castroville. So let me introduce some people quickly. This is Dr. Robach, Superintendent, Medina Valley. This is Mrs. McGowan. No. This is Miss Beasley. She's one of our good.
You need to use the microphone.
No, you can't hear me?
No.
Oh, how can you not hear me?
I'm recording.
I was a teacher and I screamed.
Hi, Kenneth Rohrbach, Superintendent, Medina Valley ISD.
Hello, Shannon Beasley, School Board President.
Chris Schuhart, Medina County Judge.
Larry Sitter, Medina County Commissioner.
Oh, come on.
Is there someone else, please? I don't see. Is there anyone else that would like to? we're going to start, let the record show that the special call meeting started. So if anybody needs cards, we have some. The specially called meeting started at? 6:04. Deborah, good?
6:04? Yes.
Let the record show that all of the council members are here. District 1, Ms. Martinez, just so you guys know. Mr. Carey, District 2. Go ahead and introduce them. I don't know you.
Jesse Myers, District 3. Todd Sherhart, District 4.
Herb Dyer, District 5.
Thank you. And I've already introduced the officials in attendance, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Binker. And again, just remember, write anything you like on your cards, leave them out here in front, and we'll answer the questions in a following meeting. If you have other questions you don't want to write on the card, send them to mayor@CastrovilleTexas.gov, and I will collect them for them. Thank you so much, you guys. So important. Wonderful.
Good evening, and for the record, my name is Clay Binford. I'm an attorney with Norton Rose Fulbright representing the city as special counsel. I'm also a Castroville resident. I live outside the city, but call myself a Castroville resident. My family moved here in 1978, and I've lived here except for 4 years when I went to Texas A&M University, and about 9 months, when I was going to law school. But otherwise, I've been in this community. And so, before we get started, first, I thank you all for being here. I want to talk a little bit about why we're here and how I got involved. And I think it's very important that people understand that I was approached about 18 months ago and said that a developer came to talk about a development. And so we need some help in structuring an agreement as to what that might be. So this is not my agreement. I don't have any authority. I don't have any power. I'm a tool. I'm an instrument. I help implement policy, but I don't make policy. So what I set out to do was to talk to the developers and to come back to the city with the best deal that I could cut with this party at this point in time. Is it the best deal? People could argue that it's not. Is it the optimal deal? I don't know. But this is the deal with the person that is before us today. And this is where we are with a recommendation to deliver to the council to determine whether or not you want to proceed with this development under these terms. And I do want to say that this is great to see the turnout. We were a little bit nervous about the space, but I want to commend the mayor for bringing people together, having this opportunity. We've had more meetings and more people from the community talking about these kinds of things in a more collaborative way than we ever have since I've been here, at least when I was old enough to recognize things that were going on. So again, you're going to hear, first we're going to turn it over to the developer who's going to talk about the fun stuff, the boards, the pictures, the ideas, and then you're going to turn it over to me, and I apologize in advance. It's about 45 minutes of very dry data that relates to this development agreement that we spent all this time putting together. And then finally, we're going to turn it over to Russell Persine with Respect Engineering to talk about how do we accommodate this. Everybody hears the utility system limitations, and so when you bring a development like this into the fold of a system, how are you actually going to pull it off? So that's really our agenda tonight. Every presentation that you see this evening will be available through the city website. This is being recorded, so you can download it and watch it again. You can forward it along if you want. But with that introduction, Mayor, I'm going to turn it over to Will Collins with Terraport.
Thank you, Clay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, City Council. Appreciate this opportunity to be here in front of you all today to talk about Alsatian Oaks. I know that there's been a lot of talk about this project in the community for a long time, and maybe a lot of rumors, and kind of here to lay it all out there, be as transparent as possible. We've been working on this project for a really long time, and I'm excited to share this with you all tonight. My name is Will Collins. I was born and raised in McAllen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. I live in San Antonio. I've been in San Antonio for the past 15 years. I'm married. I have 3 daughters. Fourth generation Texan. Haven't been here as long as most of the families here, but been here for a while. And really, I come from a family that believes in investing in Texas communities. And really investing in Texas communities with a long-term perspective, really a multi-generational perspective. Me and my family own 100% of Alsatian Oaks. We don't have any shareholders. We don't have any timeline as to when we're going to sell this project. In fact, my desire is for my grandchildren to still be involved in Alsatian Oaks. So, what is Alsatian Oaks? What is our vision for the project? This is something that we've been working on for a really long time. We first acquired 30 acres along Highway 90 at FM 471 in 2009 and have since made several acquisitions to assemble approximately 435 acres. And our vision is to create a unique master plan community that is attractive to families who are looking to not just buy a home, but really looking for a lifestyle change. Families that are interested in coming to Castroville for the same reasons why you all love living in Castroville. And the only way that we could do that was by really taking our time to plan things up front, to be very methodical, very thoughtful about the way we plan and design the project. Also by assembling a world-class team of architects, engineers, designers, landscape architects, and really just being very, very true to the city itself and trying to bring in design elements that honor Castroville's heritage, honor the buildings that you see within the community today, taking design elements that you all see throughout the community and materials that are commonly used throughout the community and incorporating that all into Alsatian Oaks and really designing an amenity-rich community here. Again, the location is on the east side of Castroville along Highway 90 at the intersection of FM 471. Approximately 420 acres on the north side, approximately 15 acres on the south side. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry for those of you in the back, you can't see this. I think it'll be published on the city's website after this. This is our master plan. This is what we have spent a lot of time and effort in designing. And we want to make sure we get this right. We're trying to design a community that really meets the highest standards in our area. We're trying to attract the type of families that are looking for a community that they can plant roots in. And so the only way to do that is through thoughtful consideration, thoughtful planning. What you'll see here is that we have a phased development. We anticipate a build out on approximately 25 years on the conservative side, and we'll do that over phases. We have 3 different lot sizes and price points throughout the project. We have 50 front foot lots, 60 front foot lots, and 70 front foot lots. For each of those price points, we'll have multiple quality builders to ensure the architectural variety throughout the community. And this project is connected through a series of green belts, a series of hike and bike trails. We have a winding road that connects Alsatian Oaks to our adjacent neighbors and to help with connectivity throughout the city, and really trying to utilize as best possible the natural topography and the natural vegetation that's already on this property. It's a gorgeous piece of property. We're very fortunate to live in the hill country, and we plan on maximizing what is already the natural landscape of the project. Sorry, excuse me as I flip through this. Okay, so what was really important to us was making sure that we get the architectural theme of this project correct. There are a lot of unique design elements within the city of Castroville that aren't quite Alsace, they're not quite German, they're agrarian. So we're trying to honor all of those things in our design and be thoughtful about the design. This is our amenity center. And this will be the first structure that's built within a project. So it's really important that we get this right, because this is what's going to set the tone for the architectural theme for the rest of the project. If you'll notice, we've used the same color palette that you see predominantly throughout the city of Castroville. We've got the kind of rustic red roof, metal roof, the roof pitches that you see throughout Castroville, the tower element, which is more European, but it's kind of adapted to the farming community style that you see here in Castroville. We're utilizing elements of stone and stucco to represent the architectural style within Castroville. All of this, we've gone through a lot of iterations of every aspect of this project, and we're not done. I'm sure we still have iterations to go, but I think it's important that I emphasize to you all that there's been a lot of thoughtful, careful planning and consideration that's been put into the design of this project. We are multi-generational holders. It's extremely important to us that we get this right. Over a 25-year build-out, if we don't get the first couple phases right, we're not going to be able to sell lots for the back phases. As people don't want to drive through a community that has deteriorated over the past 25 years to buy a home on the backside of the project. So we're very thoughtful and intentional about the way we've designed this project. Sorry, my clicker here isn't cooperating. Okay, so the neighborhood design. We did not want to go with a traditional grid layout. We were looking to maximize curvability. So what we've done is we've taken the streets and made sure we've curved them. We've added parks throughout the neighborhood. We've added landscape buffers against the major thoroughfare. We have utilized Flat Creek as a green belt to enhance the landscaping along the outer portion of the neighborhood. Everything, all the design work that's been done here has been done with very thoughtful consideration. Again, we think one of the best ways to enhance the value of the community, to enhance the attractiveness of the community, is to make sure that you've got a lot of green space, a lot of parks, a lot of open space. So we have accounted for, we'll have community parks throughout Alsatian Oaks. We'll have hike and bike trails throughout that connect the entire project together, including the commercial portion of the project. We'll have playgrounds throughout to make sure we are attracting young families, and utilizing the natural vegetation as much as possible, and naturescapes, again, to make it attractive for young families. In addition to the natural vegetation, we have hired a landscape architect to really come in and help us plan to bring in other native species to further enhance the landscaping throughout the project. So our commercial portion of the project is approximately 75 acres. And that translates to approximately 400,000 square feet of commercial space. We anticipate that will predominantly be retail and restaurants, but we've also gotten some demand for medical office space. We've gotten demand for entertainment venues and sports venues. And this is also, the site plan is designed so that it's a cohesive plan with the residential portion. So it flows into the residential portion. We anticipate that this 400,000 square feet will take approximately 15 years to build out. We anticipate it will be a mix of local, regional, and national tenants. And honestly, we already have demand from retailers, and we're excited about beginning work here. Again, the architectural theme is very important to us, that we get this right and that we represent what Castroville is. So again, thoughtful consideration as to the design and the materials used for our commercial buildings, and the sole purpose of this is really to attract the highest quality tenant possible. And that's really my presentation. I appreciate everybody's time and attention and being here tonight, and appreciate City Council and Mayor and Clay for all the work y'all done. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Will. Now we're going to go into my part of the presentation, which is where we start discussing the terms of the development agreement. How do we actually bring all of this off these pages and incorporate it into the city, is what really the development agreement is. It's an agreement. Again, for those that can't read this, I apologize. So I'm probably going to go ahead and read most of the slides so you get the basis of the information, but you can follow this up by downloading the copy of the presentation off the city's website. First slide is a development agreement. What is it? It's an agreement between Highway 90 Castroville Partners Limited, a Texas limited partnership, and the city of Castroville, Texas, a Texas general law municipality. How is it authorized? This is not special archaic law. It is subchapter G of chapter 212 of the Texas Local Government Code and chapter 380 of the Texas Local Government Code. These statutory provisions are used across the state for development agreements just like this. So why is the development agreement necessary? This property that we're talking about is located outside the city limits. Part of it is inside the ETJ and part of it is outside the ETJ. That's the extraterritorial jurisdiction. Current Texas law limits the ability of the general law municipality to annex new territory. You can no longer have forced annexation or involuntary annexation. So in general, annexation requires mutual consent of the owners or residents of the property to be annexed and the municipality that is doing the annexing. I'm going to move this over. So why is annexation desirable? Why are we even talking about this? Well, annexation provides benefits to both the property owner and the developer and the municipality. The developer gains access to services, municipal services that are only available to people and property owners that are within the city. Now, the municipality, by having something brought into the city, obtains a greater degree of control and oversight over the development activities occurring in and around its municipality. So you bring people in, you can regulate them. But also, you gain access to new revenues. And we're going to talk about this in greater detail later. This property, which sits just on the outside of town, is not producing any revenues for the city. So how do you voluntarily annex? By mutual agreement of the property owner and the municipality. And so in any mutual agreement, you have terms and conditions for how that will occur. The terms of voluntary annexation are memorialized in an agreement, and the result of this process is the development agreement that we're talking about today. So how did we get here? I talked about this earlier in my introduction. In 2018, the developer approached the city to discuss reduction of minimum residential lot size requirements and the city sharing its development costs of public infrastructure, only public infrastructure, related to a mixed commercial and residential development of 417 acres located outside the city's corporate limits in exchange for voluntary annexation and increased development standards that would result in a high-quality development. But after about 15 months of negotiation, we arrived at a development agreement that we're presenting before the council for consideration today. Well, not today, but the first presentation today. So what does it say? It basically says the terms by which the development of Alsatian Oaks will occur upon its annexation into the city. It provides for the developer's receipt of reimbursement for a portion of its costs of investment in public infrastructure. But the source of that reimbursement is limited to revenues that are derived from the property annexed into the city. No other city revenues are in any way put at risk by this development. And it provides for additional benefits to be received by the city to assist with its ability to accommodate responsible development in the city's eastern quadrant. So we're looking at this development to provide a regional solution to a much larger issue, which is development in addition to just this development. It's very important to say that this development agreement does not require or attempt to modify any existing city agreements. So city agreements between the ESD, the county, anything that's already in place are not impacted by this agreement at all. So the project scope, we talked about it in generalities with Will's conversation earlier, but it's specifically in the document. We have 417.848 acres, and it excludes Walmart. So the Walmart and its tax revenues, both sale and property tax, are not subject to this agreement. Those are already in place and already subject to another. We're looking at 378,030 square feet of commercial space. This is to be developed over a 15-year projected development schedule. And this would have 197 living unit equivalent, or LUEs. Living unit equivalent would be the equivalent water and wastewater usage of one household. So this is how we project how much in wastewater and water capacity we need to service the commercial. The residential side, 950 single-family residential lots, 24-year projected development schedule. That's roughly 40 lots per year. So it is not a robust, large, short-term development. As Will said, this is very measured. Over time, the absorption is only 40 lots per year. That's 950 LUEs. And in addition, we talked about parks, green space, and amenity center. The amenity center itself is large, as Will said. It's the keystone of the project, and that's 32 LUEs. And then we have public facilities set aside. We'll talk about it a little bit. At build-out, and based on current values, we will have approximately $35 million in public infrastructure and approximately $450 million in new taxable assessed value. That's $108 million in commercial and $342 million in residential, and 1,179 LUEs. Now, this is interesting to me. As we look at the total investment, we're talking about $485,805,599 in new development with just this project itself. So I thought this was curious to me. How does this fit in with the city as it currently exists? Well, if you look, the city's current taxable assessed value in 2019 is $207,751,496. So this development alone would add to the city's tax base by 2.5 times. So the average home value in the city, based on the current tax rolls from the county, we have a current market value of $200,203 and a taxable value after you apply exemptions of $186,478. That's the average home in Castroville. For electric customers, we have 1,244 residential, 303 commercial, so a little over 1,500. Wastewater, we have 1,031 residential and 163 commercial. So that's about 1,190. Water customers, 1,145 residential and 211 commercial. So basically 2.5 times in additional value and double the number of LUEs. That's the scope of this development. Now we're going to talk about the commercial development first. It is to be built to city standards, except that the general design will be as agreed to in the development agreement, which are these boards that you see out here. So as they go in to market a total scope of commercial development, they wanted the elevations to be predetermined and pre-agreed to. And so these are what have been proposed and designed and are part of the agreement. It will be built to accommodate restaurants, retail, medical, professional. We have prohibited certain types of commercial business because we don't want them here. We don't want sexually oriented businesses or shops dedicated to sale of drug or tobacco paraphernalia. Unlicensed massage parlors, bingo halls, pawn shops, payday lenders, things of that nature are prohibited in the development agreement for being occupants within this commercial scope. Now, financial modeling, we're going to talk about this later because it's very important to determine the amount of revenues that will ultimately be generated by this for both the city and the developer reimbursement. They have assumed $150 per square foot in taxable value and $225 in annual retail sales per square foot. That's how you determine sales tax. And then they inflate this 1.5% annually over a 30-year cycle. So $225 per day in 2019 or 2020 would then be inflated on an aggregate 1.5% per year inflation. So you can't read this at all, but if you go and pull this off the presentation, you'll see how the value runs up. We talk about this development. Here's what's going to happen in the different years, the different size of the lots, and then you would pair these schedules with these maps, and you can see how they anticipate this thing being built out. And you'll see that we have developments in year 1 down to year 15. And then you see the dollar values that come in, that totals the $108 million, but again, over a 15-year build out. For the residential development, this is the one that we'll spend a little bit of time talking about because it gets a little complex. All the residential development is to be built to city standards, except as we modified in the development agreement. We have a minimum gross lot size of 8,000 square feet and a minimum net lot size of 6,000 square feet. We'll talk about this in greater detail in a minute. The homes to be built on the lots have a minimum 1,400 square foot per home living space, but this excludes the garage, so it actually has to be living space. It's limited to site-built homes on slabs, and there's a requirement of 75% all masonry, stone brick or stucco, not composite hardy board, exterior from ground to roof line on 3/4 of the house. So this includes both single and two-story homes. Now the fourth side, the 25%, that would typically be the back of the house, and that would be some kind of a composite hardy board. The floor plan restrictions, and this was specifically an idea provided by the mayor, is that we have a restriction to where we can't have the same floor plan side by side or across the street. So this is to preclude some type of tract home. You have diversity in architecture design throughout your community. So what does net square footage mean? That means the actual platted lot size. So we'll talk about this in a minute, but you have a standard lot depth of 120 feet. And then you calculate square footage by the frontage of that lot. And we have 50 feet, 60 feet, and 70 feet. So a 50-foot lot times 120-foot depth is a 6,000 square foot lot. The gross square footage means that the net square foot per lot plus the dedicated green space and parks within the development allocated to each lot on a pro rata basis. So this means that the developer has determined to not develop otherwise developable property. Now, some of it's floodplain, but some of it could be developed. By having that set aside, we give a smaller net lot size so long as the combination of set aside green space plus the minimum actual net lot size equals 8,000 square feet. So again, our permitted frontages are 50s, 60s, and 70s, producing net lot sizes of 6,000, 7,200, and 8,400. You would then have to add additional green space to those lots that are below the 8,000 square foot minimum to bring them up to over the 8,000 square foot minimum. For context, current western expansion into the far west Bexar County, those residential developments have mixes of 40, 45, and 50 foot lots. So you're looking at 4,800, 5,400, and 6,000 square foot lots. So in the typical development spilling over from San Antonio, their largest high-end lots are our lowest. We also wanted to be sure that we had a good mix of lots, that we didn't front load everything with the smaller ones. So we have a maximum of 50-foot frontage lots at no more than 60% of all residential lots, or 570 max. And then the 60s and 70s, or possibly larger, will comprise the remaining 40%, or 380 lots. Now, how does residential lot equate to value on the ground? So this is an interesting equation, but a developed lot is based on an assumption that each 10 feet of lot frontage equates to $10,000 in value. So a 50-foot frontage lot has a value of $50,000. And the lot value is about 20% of the build-out value of the home. So if you took a 50-foot lot times $10,000 per 10 feet times 5, so that would be 50 times 10 is 5,000 times 5, or 50,000 times 5 is a $250,000 home. So we've modeled this off of the 50s, 60s, and 70s having average home values of $250,000, $300,000, and $350,000. Now, it's again important that we talk about how these financial assumptions factor into the modeling, because we'll talk about this later. That's the only source of reimbursement to the developer, so they're incentivized to make sure that these numbers are high. But if you compare these anticipated or projected values to what we talked about a few minutes ago with the average home in Castroville is $200,000, you will see that it is even the minimum number here is significant in comparison to what we currently have. So this is a similar table. Again, you'll have to go and download this to see it, but it shows the lots being absorbed and the value that's associated with it to get to the $342 million number. It averages out to 40 homes per year, but you'll see that they have modeled the idea that you're going to have a recession and expansion, booms and busts in the residential cycle. So for example, in one year you have 50 units, the next year you have 12, then you have 60, then you have 46. So there's ups and downs over a 24-year period, and this is attempting to model that and to account for not only the good times but the bad. So we think that that's a pretty conservative model. So now we get to the public infrastructure, and this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, because we have two types of public infrastructure, and I've called it inside development and outside development. But what it really is, it's development that is public infrastructure that only supports the development, and I'm calling that inside development. And then outside public development or public infrastructure, which can be tied into the larger public infrastructure system to where you can service not only this development, but a lot of the things that are going around the area. So the inside development infrastructure is essentially streets, arterials, collectors, and access. We're including the improvements to Highway 90 that are technically outside the development. That is just to enter the development, so that have it under this category. Water improvements, sanitary sewer and wastewater. That's, again, we have some off-site improvements, but that really benefits the system. There's natural gas, there's a detention pond. The streets, though they're in here, within the inside of the development, we'll talk about connectivity to other areas. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Outside the development, improvements to benefit the area both inside and outside Alsatian Oaks, particularly the water capacity issues. How can we use this development to provide a water capacity solution that brings sufficient capacity not only to the development's boundary, but also oversized lines that will allow development of other property and other people to tie in and solve some issues of water pressure and flow and fire suppression and things that currently don't exist out there. So all public infrastructure, whether it's inside or outside the development, has to be built to city code. Upon completion, it has to be dedicated to the city at no additional cost to the city and lien-free. It means we don't accept any debts or liens of the developer. Before we accept it, it has to be inspected by a city-selected and approved inspector prior to our acceptance of the dedication. So we have to sign off that it's actually built to and compliant with our codes. And any warranties or guarantees that comes with the providers of the public infrastructure transfers to the city. So we get the benefit of all of that so that we don't have to pay for a problem that we might accept in a dedication. So again, all costs of the public infrastructure are to be paid by the developer, upfront by the developer, as and when necessary. The estimated cost of the inside development infrastructure is $21,496,331. So that is their public infrastructure investment. Excuse me. Now the outside development public infrastructure, that is to be determined, the cost of that is to be determined by a public bid procurement process that is controlled by the city. The developer reimbursement of public infrastructure costs represents the basis of developer incentives under the development agreement. So they're asking that we help them with the new revenues from this development recoup the cost of their public infrastructure development. Otherwise, it would be passed along to the potential buyers of the development, which would make the success of this development significantly more difficult. So we'll talk about this in greater detail afterwards, but the developer incentives generally, the cost of the inside development infrastructure reimbursed over time with a split of the collected ad valorem and sales tax solely within the development. Now the outside the development infrastructure would be reimbursed by an impact fee credit for impact fees that are required solely within the development. Now the impact fees under state law can only be utilized for certain things, and that is increasing water and wastewater capacity. So we would have to be investing the impact fees into public infrastructure anyway. So this is a way to get somebody to pay for those costs up front, and then we recoup them as and when the impact fees are collected. So the developer reimbursement is limited to the actual costs of the public infrastructure and subject to the availability of revenues generated solely within the development. So again, the developer has to cut the check for it. We don't pay him back anything more than he actually pays, and he only gets paid to the extent that the development produces the revenue sufficient to pay him back. So we've split the off-site public infrastructure because this is really a catalytic event in order for him to be able to develop it. We've split it into phase 1 and phase 2. And the reason for this is as we started thinking about a 24-year build-out, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to build capacity in year 1 for something that you won't need until year 24. So we have city-appointed engineers that are going to evaluate and analyze the immediate, medium, and long-term water utility system needs of the area in which the development is located. Not just this development, but all anticipated development in the area. Under the development agreement, within 6 months of its execution, we have to notify the developers of the scope and cost of necessary system improvements to service its development for the first 3 to 5 years of project development. The idea is that we're going to utilize the existing system capacity, minor improvements that will boost what we can do on a relatively expeditious and cheaper basis. And we'll tell him, here's the cost. He pays us back, we get that put into place, and he can start developing, which means that we can start generating the revenues. We'll calculate the costs of the developer that are going to be actually borne by the usage of his capacity. So we'll figure out how much he uses, we'll give him a pro rata cost. And then we'll pair that money with some other available funding sources, primarily being the city undertook a line replacement program about 5 years ago with the Texas Water Development Board. And there was a $3 million loan. That project was completed, and there's about $800,000 left. It can only be used for a project like that, which is line looping for water, for drinking water. So those funds that we borrowed and we're paying interest on, they're not currently utilized. They can only be used for a specific purpose. This is one of them. We've talked to the Water Development Board, and they would let us reallocate or repurpose those debt proceeds that we would then pair with the developer contribution to be able to accomplish these near-term system improvements. And then once you bring on that capacity, the city could then recoup the debt money by collecting impact fees from other people that might tie onto the lines. So for the cost that the developer pays towards this, as their development proceeds, they would receive an impact fee credit for the amount that they receive when the fee credit is actually owed. This structure allows the city to utilize the existing resources to provide its capacity in an expeditious commencement of development. Phase 2, what happens in years 6 through 24? That's the second phase of the off-site public infrastructure. So once we complete the near term, we immediately move to the second term. So within a year after the first phase completion, the same city engineers have to notify the developer of the scope and cost of necessary system improvements to service the Alsatian Oaks for a long-term balance of project development. This allows us time to not only think about it from this particular development, but where does a water tower go? Where does a well go? What is the best location to get the best economies of scale and the most efficient use of the system? It might be in the site that we thought specifically for this, but it might not. But it gives us the chance to look at this and to determine when, where, and how much. So then we'll do the same thing. We'll tell the developer, look, we're going to do a 1 million gallon capacity in a water tower. You're going to need 250,000. We're going to charge you for that. You're going to pay us. We're going to pair that with going to the other development in the area, and we're going to put that together and we're going to build it. And that way we can get the benefit of everybody else, again, paying for their appropriate cost. And it brings a long-term utility solution to the area. It's not just this development. It's very important. It's what happens after this development as other people come along. Again, the developer would receive its impact fee credit in an amount equal to his contribution toward the long-term area water solution. And again, this structure allows the city to pair a broader planning strategy with its available funding sources. So the off-site public infrastructure, obviously this is key to the developer being able to start his development. And frankly, there has been some concern on the development side that we sign a development agreement and nothing happens. So they have obviously committed a significant amount of their personal capital, and they want to see this happen. So if the city does not perform with respect to its phase 1 or phase 2 infrastructure by the identified deadlines, the developer can provide its own off-site water solution. It can size them for its development, it can pay for them, it can build them and then turn them over to the city. They will still get the same impact fee, but the impact fee credit, but the infrastructure will be sized and located exclusively for the service of Alsatian Oaks. It's likely a more costly option because you lose economies of scale, and the singular focus will likely defeat the area of the regional goals, but provides the developer a path to continue his development. So if the city doesn't want to participate, then he can do the same thing on its own. Probably not ideal for anybody, but it's a way to move it forward. The developer, again, would receive his impact fee credit in an amount equal to the cost of his capacity-based public infrastructure. Now, in this scenario, they would probably receive more in impact fees because it would be more costly if they did it all on their own just for them. So then we looked at this and we said, okay, the developer is providing all of this public infrastructure. You're doing all of these things from a development standpoint that are good, but you're also coming to the community, as Will said himself, because the community is attractive. And so you're capitalizing on that, and you are monetizing that for your profit. So how do we get something back to the community? So we started talking about other enhancements as to what we could do. And the first thing we did is we insisted on a 2-acre set aside for municipal services within the development's commercial area. And they've identified this as $500,000. So right in the middle of the core of the commercial area, we have 2 acres that were going to be transferred to the city, and the city can use it for a municipal annex. They could pair with another local government to provide other types of services. They can provide emergency response services by turning it over to the ESD. They have options as to what they want to do with that land, but they have the land in their possession and don't have to worry about this down the road. We also thought about, what are we going to do with all these families and their kids in a new elementary school? And I know that I've talked to Dr. Rohrbach and Ms. Beasley about developers. They want to charge the school fair market value for their property. Well, if we put all of these homes and we didn't provide for a school, we would have a traffic issue in Castroville Elementary. So we had them call the school and dedicate 18.96 acres for a new elementary school at some point in time in the future, sold to the school at the developer's cost. So they get the school gets the benefit of a very low cost of land, and it's at the option of the school district. Once they say, the developer says, we're ready to give it to you, the school has 12 months to decide whether or not they want to buy it, and if they don't, then it'll go back into the development. The last, well, one of the last contributions is we wanted the developer to bring value back into the city in something that is more of a quality of life type incentive. And so we had the developer agree to deliver $1.5 million in cash to the city for a quality of life type project that the developer has consent rights to. They don't want their $1.5 million to be used on streets in River Bluff. They don't get any benefit of that. They don't want a drainage project to fix the land across the street that allows it to be developed to compete with them. They don't want that either. They want something that the residents of Alsatian Oaks, as well as the residents of Castroville as exists today, are going to have benefit to and look to as a keystone quality of life project. And they've agreed to commit that to the youth sports of the area. And so we have some keys as to how that would happen, but the city has to notify the developer of what its actual project is by the first anniversary of the development agreement's execution. Then they would approve that. They've already agreed to what I've just discussed as being a potential use of that funding. The developer would receive signage evidencing it as being the source of the funding. So the Alsatian Oaks dedicated ball field or whatever it might be. And then they're required to deliver this to the city by the 3rd anniversary of the completion of the Phase 1 infrastructure. You remember I talked about that being a very important component. But this is very near-term money incentive to the city because just planning a project of this magnitude is probably going to eat up most of that 3 years. And again, I said that the developers agreed to use the funds for youth sports and recreation activities. And then finally, and important to me in the city, is the developers agreed to pay my costs. Now I'm going to credit Commissioner Sitter for this idea about 8 years ago, and he said that if developers are going to come in and I'm going to get hired to represent the political subdivisions, they're going to pay my costs. So my cost is $100,000, and that's at risk to me. If there's no development agreement, if the council says we're not interested, I don't get paid anything. But if I do get paid, it comes from the developer and not from the city. So the provision of services, once we actually annex this, who's going to provide services? Well, the city upon annexation is to provide all public services typical to property within its corporate limits. This includes police protection, maintenance of public infrastructures, including streets once dedicated, water, wastewater, natural gas services. CPS Energy provides the electric service. The city collects a 3% franchise fee on areas within the city serviced by CPS Energy. This is within the service territory of the Medina County ESD, who would provide fire and emergency response services. Cable, internet, and telephone services would be provided by private enterprise. So, fundamental tenet to this is that the development pays its own way. So the developer pays the cost of public infrastructure, the contributions that will act to enhance and complement the community, and the city's cost of the negotiation. So the total developer contribution is $23,596,331 for direct on-site public infrastructure, certain off-site sewer, Highway 90 access, plus the cost of carry of this over a 30-year period. They're anticipating 6% interest. They're a private borrower, and that would be about $11,656,875. And then we have the additional off-site public infrastructure plus the associated interest that we would notify them once we do the analysis and evaluation on that. Cost reimbursement. This is what the developers asked for in return for doing all of this. The developer, under the terms of the agreement, the developer would receive reimbursement for the lesser of the actual cost of public infrastructure and related financing costs and the two numbers I just said, $23,596,331 for capital and $11,656,875 for interest. So what we've done is we've set a ceiling but not a floor. So if the developer spends $30 million on capital and incurs $15 million in interest, they only get paid $23,596,331 and $11,656,875. if they incurred $20 million in capital and $8 million in interest. The only thing they get paid back is $20 million in capital and $8 million in interest. They don't get paid back more than they actually pay for infrastructure, which again, they dedicate to us. And they take risk for those costs not being sufficient to cover their cost of public infrastructure. Then they'll get the actual cost of contribution for their offsite public infrastructure, which again, we control, we tell them what they owe, we go through the public bidding requirements, and that's how we determine what that amount would be. So what's the source of the cost reimbursement? It is limited solely to the revenues generated within the Alsatian Oaks development, the on-site public infrastructure, and the other public contributions. There would be a proposed city split of its 2/3 sales tax revenues. Remember, the other third goes to the ESD, that's not at play here. And the M&O ad valorem tax revenues. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's just M&O, not debt service, collected within the development. Again, the sales tax revenues to be split do not include the 1/3 sales tax revenues to be received by the ESD pursuant to its existing contract. So beginning on the phase 1 outside public infrastructure completion date, there would be an 80% split, 80% to the developer, 20% to the city of collections of the M&O and sales tax for 15 years. Thereafter, through the 33rd year, we would then, I'm sorry, that should say 70%. After that, we decrease the split from 80-20 to 70-30 for the remaining of the 33-year period. So then we have the offsite public infrastructure, that's the impact fee credit. It's subject to the same time limits, and that's subject to impact fees as calculated. The city changes their impact fees along the way. They're subject to those increases. We're not setting any of that today, but they would get a credit for anything that they contribute towards this infrastructure that's offsite and regionally beneficial. So the duration, we touched on this briefly, but the reimbursement is to continue until the earlier to occur of actual cost reimbursement and the 33rd anniversary of the phase 1 outside public infrastructure completion date. So if these development models are wrong and we have been too conservative and we build this value out much quicker than we anticipate, it means more revenue is going to be realized, the financing costs will be less, and we'll have more money to pay them off quicker. So if this happens in year 20, the deal goes away, all the revenues then fall back to the city. Contrarily, if we haven't been conservative enough, we hit an economic downturn, nobody wants to come here, and this development doesn't build out, and we get to the 33rd anniversary and they've only collected $15 million, deal's over. They don't get paid anything else. So then, at that point going forward, the city would have the right to receive 100% of the revenue. So again, we've set a ceiling, but not a floor. Now, we talked about the developer having to incur or undertake its own outside public infrastructure if we do not have the city participation. And if we do that, if that happens and they have to take on that liability, we understand that there are increased costs, that there are delays associated with that. We've let time go by, and we haven't done what we said we'd do by when we said we'd do it. So we extended, in that circumstance, the 33rd year to the 38th year, because that means that the project didn't have the cooperative partner that we anticipated on day one. The financial risk is entirely borne by the developer. The developer has an upfront payment obligation, including performance obligations if the phase 1 public infrastructure is complete. So they have to pay for the infrastructure. If we get to this point, they have to pay the $1.5 million. They have to convey the land to the city. So they have obligations that manifest very quickly. There's no reimbursement for incomplete or unfinished public infrastructure. So the city triggers the developer's right to reimburse by accepting the infrastructure. If we don't agree that it's built to code, if our inspector says that it's not compliant or sufficient with what we need, then we reject the infrastructure and they don't yet have a reimbursement right. So we have protections as to how we go about approving an authorization for reimbursement. Again, no development, no source for reimbursement, no recoupment of costs of public infrastructure by the developer. In exchange, what does the city get? Well, in short, it gets revenues. Currently, the subject property generates no revenue for the city, except for tap fees, which are the tapping into the existing infrastructure. And since the developer is laying its own lines, we don't really have anything for them to tap into. They're doing it themselves. So we gave a variance on tap fees, but other than that, they're paying full freight on all of their city fees, building permits, plan reviews, and impact fees. So we're projecting $2,079,449 in building permit fees, split between residential and commercial, about $1.75 and $330,000. $1.35 million in plan review fees, again split between residential and commercial, 1.135 and 216,000. And $8 million roughly in impact fees. Now remember, these are probably subject to sharing with them for the offsite public infrastructure, but that's the amount of impact fees this currently provides. The sales tax and property tax splits. We know that an 80-20 and 70-30 split is pretty generous in favor of the developer. But the city does receive 20% in the first 15 years and 30% thereafter, and once the agreement terminates, they get 100% in perpetuity after that. And over the life of the development agreement, we're projecting $5,867,000 in sales tax revenues and $8.14 million in M&O ad valorem tax revenues. Now, in the tax revenues, you know, or just, I think you've probably seen your tax bill, the tax rate is split into two components: maintenance and operations and interest and sinking fund. INS is debt tax. We excluded from day one the debt component of the ad valorem tax split. So from day one, the city gets 100% of the debt service tax rate. Currently, they levy that at about 4 cents to pay existing city debt. This development will immediately start paying for existing city debt at the time of annexation, plus any additional debt that the city incurs, regardless of where the projects occur within the city. This can be that street project in River Bluff or parks or drainage. Then those new owners within Alsatian Oaks are going to pay their fair share of all city debt. And we're modeling this based off the current city rate of $2.5 million. If you had a bond election or issuance or capital program at some point in the future, that number would obviously go up probably significantly. So these are just revenue models that show how we get to the different amounts, the $5.8 million in sales tax. I want to show here, this is you'll see up here, this is the city's 1%, which reflects only the 2/3 sales tax collection. Here is the ad valorem tax collections, the 10.7 million. And so we come in, the total amount to the city is about $28 million. And this, to me, I believe is really the nice incentive, because we have so much flexibility. You get 100% of the revenues, the utility system revenues, from day one. And we know that the CPS Energy service territory includes Alsatian Oaks, so you only get the 3% franchise fee. But the city's going to provide the water and wastewater and to 1,179 new LUEs. And the city receives from inception 100% of these revenues. Now, the city currently has a $15,595,000 utility system debt that's paid by the existing utility system customer base. Remember, we talked about the phase one improvements. This is to try and squeeze the capacity out of the existing system with very minor updates in capital infrastructure. We have unused water and wastewater capacity that the engineers are going to talk about in a minute, but that's currently being paid by the existing customer base. The new customers will diffuse these fixed costs over a larger customer base, freeing up additional revenues to be utilized elsewhere throughout the city. Now, I believe that the utility system rates that are currently imposed upon the city are not going to have the same application to the new Castroville residents, because I do know that there are portions of the wastewater system, for example, that are supported by electric revenues. Well, because CPS is the provider of electric at the new development, we're not going to have that source to subsidize wastewater, so we need to raise that rate to be sure that these guys are paying their fair share. So we'll have to conduct a rate study to see what the appropriate rate scale would be, but I anticipate there being a dual rate scale, one for existing city and one for new entrances into the city, these new developments. So what kind of city protections do we have? We have reps, warranties, and covenants to assure performance. Those are pretty standard. The developer is required to report to the city its development progress every 180 days. If the developer defaults, the city has the right to terminate with no more reimbursement. Now, if there's been an accepted public infrastructure that the city has brought in, the developer paid for, we'll continue to pay them for that. But we also have city takeover rights, which I think is very important, meaning that if over the life of this development, we decide as the city that we can do it more cheaply, or we can finance cheaper than 6%, we can do tax exempt at 3%, and the whole development is built out, and now it's just an economic equation, we can take them out, pay them off immediately, all the revenues fall to our bottom line, and then we pay them a lesser amount. So again, I think what I was trying to go through in this development agreement is flexibility to the city. We're not putting anything up front. This is the worst case scenario, but if things happen and you want to take a more active role, you have the option to do so to your financial benefit. And I really think that refinancing this at some point over a 30-year cycle, replacing that 6% rate with something lower, I could very well see that happening. So I look at this again as a worst case scenario to the city. So what are the other options to reduce the city's burden? Well, the developers agreed to assist with the creation of a tax increment reinvestment zone over the property once it's annexed. This would allow other taxing districts, the county, the ESD, and the hospital district, not the school district because it would impact their state funding, but it would allow these other taxing districts to contribute a portion of their tax revenues to lessen the city's burden. And then those revenues could be used not only within the development, but also with development or improvements outside the property that benefit the zone. We'll talk about this in a second, because one of them is traffic mitigation. Now, my thought behind this, again, it's an option to the city and it's an option for the other taxing districts to participate, but everybody is benefited by the higher values that the city is requiring the developer to put in the ground. So it seems equitable that everybody that benefits is also willing to participate. And obviously, the quicker that the developers reimburse and this thing is built out, then the quicker the city enjoys the full benefit of its investments, as well as everybody else. So what this agreement does, as a nutshell, is it provides an anchor tenant to provide the resources to solve regional issues. It provides a funding source for solving our regional water infrastructure. It provides an increased customer base to utilize unused utility system capacity, reducing the existing fixed costs on a per utility system customer. There's a funding source for a true quality of life project that will meaningfully impact the community's youth. And I'll show you this slide in a minute, but there's a potential near-term opportunity that could provide relief from westbound Highway 90 traffic congestion. So you've seen this map, and again, apologies to the ones in the back, but here's the development. And I was looking at this because it comes across Highway 90 at the stoplight at 471. And the property or the arterial through here comes all the way up and ends in the northwest corner. And so I asked the developers to run a map for me to tell me how far it was from the exit of the property in its northwest corner to 471 north, which comes out right around the RV park just north of town. And it's less than a mile. So when we talk about tax increment reinvestment zone and regional solutions and utilities and offsite infrastructure and traffic, how can you use this development to start fixing some of the problems of growth that we have? And this is a good visual to me. And you talk about, this is probably more, not so much as a representative of the city, but this is me as a resident. So I would love for my kids who are sitting in the back to graduate with 120 kids in their graduating class. 90 of them went to kindergarten together all the way through. It's not happening anymore. I'd love for my commute to be 30 minutes into San Antonio, but it's an hour and 15 minutes and I sit through 8 lights to get from one side of town to the other. So we have a lot of the issues from growth. We haven't done a real good job of accommodating it in a way that's beneficial to the community. And I truly believe that this town is the gateway to Medina County, and there's a responsibility that belongs with that. And so that's really why we're here today. Now, so what are others doing? This is something that we're leaping off to, and are we doing good, or are we doing bad? So I looked around to see where others are. And I talked about the Western Bexar County developments that are including 40s, 45s, and 50s. 40-foot frontage lots are their entry-level homes. That's completely compliant with San Antonio development standards. Their largest lots are our smallest, and there's no gross square footage component. And interestingly, earlier this year, I was sitting at the city council meeting in Fredericksburg, and they were calling a bond election, and before us on the agenda was approval of an annexation agreement, a voluntary annexation agreement, development agreement. And I was stunned by what I saw. It was voluntary annexation for 45-foot frontage lots, 5,400 square feet. No discussion, no public comment, motion second approved. And I know Fredericksburg is a community that obviously has a historical integrity and has dealt with development, but I took a picture of it. And you can't see it too well from the back, but you'll see it's the grid pattern that Mr. Collins talked about. And there's no green space, there are no curved borders, but this is what other people are doing. So when I put all of that together, I'm pretty proud of what we're talking about tonight. So what happens next? That's always the big question. So if the council would approve this agreement, the work is really just beginning. The engineer has to continue its work to determine the scope of the offsite public infrastructure. That's already in progress. Russell's going to talk about it in a second. We'd have a rate study to determine the requisite utility rate scale for new entries into the city. The city has to start thinking about how it would maximize and leverage its contribution, because I really truly believe that's seed money for some greater project, and it's not just money to be spent and then not think about it anymore. We're gonna have additional special meetings. We talked about having another one on September 4th. I think we kind of sized the room about right, but if there's significant groundswell of citizens' commentary, then we'll have more. We'll have as many as we need to. And then ultimately, at an open meeting after we conclude the special meetings, this development agreement will be presented to the council for deliberation and ultimately action upon it. So that's the schedule going forward. Again, we appreciate everybody being here tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Russell. Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to say a couple of things. What's very important is to understand the outside, what he's talking about, the outside infrastructure. If you look at the map, can you go back to that other? The one with, all of this land, what do you think is going to happen? We more or less know what's going to happen. So the outside infrastructure, for example, if they need, I'm not an engineer, a 2-inch line, we could get a 6-inch line. That way we'd be able to work with other developers and already have part of the infrastructure already there. And that's very important right now to our city. Our only revenue, we're living on electric, water, and sewer, and we're having trouble with our sewer. Water is going to bring us revenue, but it takes infrastructure. We've got well problems. We need help and cooperation. And a lot of you might say, oh, the lots are small, but think of the economy. What did you say? It's very important to really think about that idea, the economy of scale. I think one of the things that was very important to me was the fact that it's phased, because the lower cost homes, they're not going to buy the higher cost homes if you've got those lower ugly front houses in front of them. So to me, that's a really good kind of stopgap to ensure that the development will get better, because it behooves them as well as us. So anyway, this is a council meeting, so I'm actually talking to council. There is no action, there is no discussion. But as I said before, if you do have questions and you'd like to submit them for a future meeting, we have the index cards, and I would welcome your questions to send them to Mayor, as I said before, at Castroville, Texas.gov, and I will put them together to be answered. But I think this, Mr. Binford's explanation is very, very important, especially with the idea of on-site and off-site. Very important to the city, especially with the water issues. All right, here's our engineer.
Good evening. My name is Russell Persine. I'm also a long-term resident of the area. Graduated from Union Valley High School back when there was a little over 100 in the class. I've got 4 children that I'm raising here in the school district and in the area. Can y'all hear me okay? I have some slides and they'll be posted, but I kind of got one of these up in the front, so I'm going to make this pretty simple. Basically, if you look at the existing system today, we're on the west side, what I call the west side of the river, right? On the west side of the river, there's 3 wells for the water system. One was recently abandoned and capped. So there's 2 wells remaining. Those 2 wells, in addition to about 500,000 gallons of storage on Cross Hill, you see the big green tank up there? So that, I guess our forefathers were pretty smart, because we've got that hill to use gravity to push that water down, so we don't have to have an elevated tower up there. So we have 500,000 gallons of storage, actually 550, because there's another smaller storage a little further down. And we've got 2 wells on the west side. Then there are 2 8-inch water lines that come across the river and currently feed all the rest of the city, but for this little area out here. The city acquired this water system at some point, and there's a well and about 50,000 gallons of storage. So they told you earlier, in round terms, we're about to double the connections we need. So we got 500,000 gallons and 2 wells over here, and we got 50,000 gallons of storage that doesn't even tie into that system on this side. So just in round numbers, you got to replicate what you have. Okay, and so how are we gonna do that? The city has some assets on this side of town. One is, there's a well at the airport, has capacity of over 2,000 gallons per minute if you look at the well log, okay? It currently serves irrigation in and around the airport property, and it also serves as a water supply to the airport property. The well that was acquired by the city out here, it's called the Medina Valley System, it's its own system. It pumps about 400 gallons per minute. According to the well log, we could be up to 2,000 gallons per minute. So the size of the pump in the well currently restricts the amount of production that can come out of that well. When the city acquired this, they also acquired some property back behind the Chevy dealership. They own a couple acres back there. There's actually a 10-inch line that extends about halfway up to the dealership. The long-term plan 10, 12 years ago was potentially upgrading this system, coming across the highway and putting your elevated storage out east here. So basically we have to replicate long-term the storage that we have over here on this side of town in order to be able to serve the growth that's going to happen. So in round numbers, that's what we've got to try to accomplish. In the short term, in phase one, we're going to try to look at how we loop those wells, how we utilize those wells, and maybe some small storage in order to get the development moving, and then what the long-term plan is after that. There is one more well that we would like to look at. There's actually a well on the developer's property. Well log says it's about a 700 gallon per minute well, but we would like to do some due diligence on that well. It could be an asset for the city. I think it's worth the investigation to either rule it in or rule it out. And if it's ruled out, that well will have to be dealt with in some manner or some capacity. So that's the water. The wastewater, we just doubled the plant capacity, so we have plenty of capacity at the plant. The issue is, how do you get it there? Okay. In Castroville, we pump a lot of wastewater to get it up to the wastewater treatment plant. Currently, on this side of town, we have one lift station that's back here behind Country Village. So you push the flow that way. I can't imagine that lift station is going to serve this development. So you're going to have to figure that out. We did expand to the east side lift station, what we call the east side lift station, that comes through where the Nile Maxwell dealership's at, comes back here to the ball fields, and it's actually lifted from this point over to the new plant. So there is some capacity here. Actually, the dealership flows to a lift station here, and there's a force main along here. Bad news about a force main, it's pretty hard to connect into a force main. This would have been done as a gravity line. You probably would have the ability to serve these properties, but the force main was probably a cheaper option at the time. So we've got to look at basically the capacity that we have here. So really it's a matter of how do we get the wastewater from here to the current plant. So we have enough capacity at the plant, it's just how do we get it there. So basically from a water perspective, we got to figure out how to get storage and capacity in order to serve this, and what are the long-term needs of the area and how are we going to do that. And the second on the wastewater is how do we get it to the plant that we recently updated. That's a summary point. There's a map in the back of the presentation. There's a larger map up front here. If after the meeting you want to take a look, it's got the wells and the lift station locations. I'm more than happy for you to come take a look, and we'll be here. With that, I'll turn it back over to Mayor.
Again, we have an incredible group of people working on this, and they're from here, and they care deeply about Castroville, as do I. We're going to keep old Castroville, but we're going to enhance it and be able to take some of the burden off the people that live in old Castroville with utilities and things like that. Also, it's good to hear about the possibility of some kind of traffic relief too. So again, council will act on this later. We intend to have another get together with your questions now that you have a basic idea of how it will be paid for and what it would mean to the citizens. And again, we welcome input through email or the index cards. And this is an exciting opportunity for Castroville. We get this benchmark, and will be the benchmark for any further development. It's important, and Castroville is not going to be like the other places, because we have old Castroville. They have to get boats to cross the river. We're not going to let them do that. It's silly, but we will keep the old Castroville and the new Castroville will enhance, and we will enhance them. It's a win-win on both sides. So let the record show. Let's see, do I have a motion?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I know you guys are. Let the record show that the meeting was adjourned at
7:14.
7:14. Thank you so very much.